In 1979, the Troubles in Northern Ireland reached one of their most deadly and politically significant years, shattering any sense that the conflict was contained or fading. Violence intensified on both sides, and the conflict drew unprecedented international attention. The Provisional IRA continued its armed campaign with renewed determination, expanding operations beyond Northern Ireland into mainland Britain. The most defining moment of the year came in August with the IRA's killing of Lord Louis Mountbatten in County Sligo, alongside a devastating ambush at Warrenpoint in which 18 British soldiers were killed, the largest single loss of life for the British Army during the Troubles. These attacks deeply shocked the British public and reinforced the sense that the conflict had entered a more ruthless phase. Inside Northern Ireland, sectarian killings persisted. Loyalist paramilitaries carried out assassinations of Catholic civilians, while Republicans targeted security forces and perceived collaborators. Ordinary life remained dominated by fear, checkpoints, and the constant threat of bombs. Politically, 1979 offered little hope. The collapse of earlier power-sharing efforts left Northern Ireland under direct rule from London, with minimal local influence. As the decade ended, the violence showed no sign of abating, and the conflict appeared entrenched, hardening attitudes on all sides and setting the stage for the prison protests and hunger strikes that would soon redefine the struggle. Inside the grey walls of Northern Ireland's Maze prison, a different kind of war was being fought. No guns, no bombs. This was a silent, agonizing conflict, waged by men who'd been stripped of everything but their own bodies. They were Republican prisoners, and in their eyes, they were soldiers in a war for Irish independence. The British government, however, saw them as common criminals. That one fundamental disagreement had already sparked years of bitter protest, degradation, and a seemingly unbreakable stalemate. But outside the prison, the world was anything but silent. 1979 was a year of thunderous explosions, shocking assassinations, and rigid political will. It was a year that saw the conflict escalate to terrifying new heights, a year that would slam the door shut on any hope of compromise. Before the world would watch in horror as 10 men starved themselves to death, the events of 1979 would create an atmosphere so explosive, so hopeless, that those same men felt they had only one devastating weapon left. This is the story of the year that sparked the hunger strikes. On August 27, 1979, the Provisional IRA launched two of its most audacious and devastating attacks in the entire history of the Troubles. That morning, a bomb ripped through the fishing boat of Lord Louis Mountbatten, a cousin of Queen Elizabeth II, killing him and 3 others off the coast of the Republic of Ireland. Hours later, just across the border in Northern Ireland, a meticulously planned ambush at Warrenpoint killed 18 British soldiers, the Army's single greatest loss of life in one day during the conflict. The double strike sent shockwaves around the globe. But for the men locked inside the maze, these weren't just headlines. They were the final, deafening signals that their struggle was about to enter its most desperate and tragic phase. To understand how it all came to this, we have to rewind. To understand 1979, you first have to understand the war being waged inside the H-blocks of the Maze prison. The story really begins 3 years earlier, in 1976. The British government made a pivotal decision. It was ending special category status. This status was won after an earlier hunger strike in 1972. It basically meant paramilitary prisoners were treated as prisoners of war, not common criminals. They didn't have to wear prison uniforms, they didn't have to do prison work, and they had more control over their own lives inside the prison wings. It was a quiet admission that this was more than a crime wave, it was a low-level war. But the new policy of criminalization, which started on March 1, 1976, was designed to reverse all that. The strategy was simple: frame the Troubles as a matter of law and order. Paramilitaries were no longer soldiers, they were murderers, bombers, and gangsters. The conflict wasn't a political struggle, it was a crime problem. From that day on, anyone convicted of a paramilitary-related crime would be treated like any other criminal. The first Republican prisoner sentenced under this new policy was a young man named Kieran Nugent. When he was told to put on the prison uniform, he refused. According to prison lore, he told the guards, "If you want me to wear a uniform, you'll have to nail it to my back." He was thrown into his cell with nothing but a blanket. And so the blanket protest began. As more prisoners were sentenced under the new policy, they too refused the uniform and joined the protest. They were locked in their cells 24/7, with no furniture, no books, nothing but a mattress and a blanket. For 2 years, hundreds of men lived this way. Their only act of defiance was refusing to wear a piece of clothing. Then, in March 1978, things got much, much worse. After clashes with guards during slop out, the daily emptying of their chamber pots, the prisoners refused to leave their cells at all. With no way to empty their pots, and after guards allegedly kicked the contents back into the cells, the prisoners retaliated. They began smearing their own excrement on the walls. The dirty protest had begun. It was a scene from a medieval nightmare. The stench was unbearable. Food was shoved under the door, often mixing with the filth on the floor. Maggots infested the cells. When the Catholic Archbishop of Armagh, Tommaso Fiacco, visited the prison that year, he was horrified. He told the press, "I was shocked at the inhuman conditions. The stench and filth in some of the cells was almost unbearable. In 2 of them I was unable to speak for fear of vomiting." This was the grotesque stalemate as 1979 dawned. Neither the prisoners nor the authorities were willing to budge. The prisoners believed they were holding the line for their cause. The British government believed that giving in would be a victory for terrorism. The stage was set for a confrontation. All it needed was a catalyst. That catalyst would arrive in the form of a new, uncompromising leader. On May 3, 1979, the Conservative Party, led by Margaret Thatcher, won the UK general election. Thatcher had a reputation for being tough, resolute, and unbending, the Iron Lady. She had little interest in the nuances of Irish history or Republican politics. Her view was crystal clear, and she stated it with brutal simplicity. Crime is crime is crime. It is not political. For the men on the dirty protest, her election was a sign that the walls were closing in. Her government would not be swayed. The path of negotiation was being bricked up, one resolute statement at a time. The pressure inside the H-blocks was building to an unbearable level. And outside, the violence was about to explode. "1979 was one of the deadliest years of the Troubles. The violence wasn't just confined to the backstreets of Belfast or the hills of South Armagh. It was becoming more audacious, more international, and for the British establishment, much more personal. The year had already started with chilling brutality. Loyalist paramilitary groups like the UVF and UDA continued their campaigns of sectarian murder, killing Catholic civilians chosen at random, deepening the fear that poisoned daily life. But Republican paramilitaries were also expanding their own operations. On March 22, the IRA assassinated Sir Richard Sykes, the British ambassador to the Netherlands, right outside his home in The Hague. It was a clear statement: no British official was safe anywhere in Europe. Just 8 days later, on March 30th, the war was brought directly to the heart of the British government itself. Harry Neave, a Conservative member of Parliament and Margaret Thatcher's close friend, was killed by a car bomb as he drove out of the secure car park at the Palace of Westminster. The Irish National Liberation Army, or INLA, a Republican splinter group, claimed responsibility. Neave wasn't just any politician. He was the opposition spokesperson for Northern Ireland and was expected to take charge of the province after the election. He was known as a hardliner, and the INLA claimed they killed him because he would have brought the armed struggle to its knees. His assassination, just weeks before Thatcher's victory, sent a tremor of fear through the political class. It proved that even inside the supposed fortress of British democracy, they were vulnerable. As the year went on, the body count kept rising. In August, 2 British soldiers were killed by an IRA landmine. An RUC officer was shot dead in Belfast the same day. For ordinary people in Northern Ireland, life was lived against a backdrop of constant tension. British Army patrols were a daily sight. Checkpoints could spring up anywhere. The news was a grim tally of shootings and bombings. Meanwhile, a different kind of justice was being handed out. In February 1979, 11 members of the loyalist gang known as the Chronicle Butchers were sentenced to life. Their crimes were monstrous, involving the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Catholic civilians with butchers' knives. Their convictions highlighted the sickening brutality that fueled so much of the conflict, a brutality that was not the sole preserve of any one side. This relentless cycle of violence created an environment where compromise felt impossible. Every attack was met with a reprisal. Every hardline statement from politicians was met with more defiance from paramilitaries. By the summer of 1979, Northern Ireland was a pressure cooker. The heat was being turned up by Thatcher's unyielding new government and the escalating ambition of the paramilitary campaigns. And the lid was about to blow. August 27, 1979 was a bank holiday Monday. In the picturesque fishing village of Mullimore, County Sligo, 79-year-old Lord Louis Mountbatten was on his annual summer holiday. Mountbatten wasn't just a retired naval commander. He was a giant of 20th-century British history. The last Viceroy of India, a former Chief of the Defence Staff, a cousin of the Queen, and a beloved mentor to Prince Charles. He was, for all intents and purposes, royalty. Despite warnings, Mountbatten had insisted on going to Ireland, a country he loved. That morning, he took his fishing boat, the Shadow V, out to check his lobster pots. On board were his daughter Patricia, her husband John Knatchbull, their 14-year-old twin sons Nicholas and Timothy, John's 83-year-old mother, and a 15-year-old local boat boy, Paul Maxwell. The night before, an IRA member named Thomas McMahon had slipped onto the unguarded boat and planted a 50-pound radio-controlled bomb. Just a few hundred yards from shore, it was detonated. The wooden boat was instantly obliterated. Lord Mountbatten was killed instantly. His grandson, Nicholas Knatchbull, and the young boat hand, Paul Maxwell, were also killed on the spot. The others were thrown into the water, severely injured. The Dowager Baroness Brabourne would die from her injuries the next day. The world reacted with utter shock and condemnation. The IRA had assassinated a member of the royal family. In their statement, the IRA was defiant. This operation is one of the discriminate ways we can bring to the attention of the English people the continuing occupation of our country. For Prince Charles, who saw Mountbatten as an honorary grandfather, the news was devastating. He wrote in his journal, "Life will never be the same now that he has gone." But the day's bloodshed was far from over. As news of Mountbatten's death flashed across the globe, another IRA unit, from the notorious South Armagh Brigade, was putting the final touches on a very different operation. Near Warrenpoint in Northern Ireland, a convoy of British soldiers, mostly from the elite Parachute Regiment, was traveling along the road that skirts Carlingford Lough, which marks the border with the Republic. Hidden in a trailer of hay at a place called Narrow-Water Castle was a huge, 800-pound bomb. At 4:40 p.m., as the last truck passed, it was detonated by remote control from the other side of the lough. The blast was enormous, killing 6 paratroopers instantly. The surviving soldiers, believing they were under fire from across the border, immediately returned fire. Tragically, in the confusion, their bullets hit and killed a civilian, William Hudson, who was watching from the southern side of the river. The soldiers radioed for help. Reinforcements were dispatched, and a helicopter landed to evacuate the wounded. A command post was set up at a small castle gatehouse on the other side of the road. This is exactly what the IRA had anticipated. Hidden across from the command post was a second, even larger bomb, weighing close to 1,000 pounds. 32 minutes after the first blast, just as the helicopter was about to take off, the second bomb was detonated. The blast was catastrophic. It killed 12 more soldiers, including Lieutenant Colonel David Blair, the commanding officer of the Queen's Own Highlanders, who had just arrived to help. In total, 18 British soldiers were killed. A senior British general would later call it, arguably the most successful and certainly one of the best planned IRA attacks of the whole campaign. The twin attacks were a strategic masterstroke for the IRA. They had killed a member of the royal family and inflicted the heaviest ever single loss on the British Army, all in a few hours. It projected an image of ruthless competence. For Margaret Thatcher, it was a brutal baptism of fire. Any slim chance of a softer approach was gone forever. The government's resolve hardened into granite. And for the men sitting in their own filth in the H-blocks, the message was equally clear. If this is how the war is escalating outside, and this is how the government will respond, then what hope is there for us inside? On Emerald Chronicle, we're committed to telling these complex stories in detail. If you find this history as compelling as we do, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It genuinely helps us continue our work. The shockwaves from Mountbatten's assassination and the Warrenpoint ambush reverberated all the way to the Maze prison. Outside, Margaret Thatcher's government was now more determined than ever not to be seen as weak. Any concession to the prisoners, especially after such a devastating day, was politically unthinkable. Her stance that Republicans were common criminals was now set in stone. For the prisoners, the door to a political solution had been slammed shut, bolted, and barricaded. Inside the H-blocks, the dirty protest was dragging into its third year. And it wasn't working. The world's media had mostly lost interest, and the British government was simply ignoring them. The prisoners felt they were at a dead end, being broken physically and psychologically with nothing to show for it. Morale was plummeting. The question that hung in the foul air of the cells was, what next? From the prisoners' perspective, they'd exhausted all other options. They had refused the uniform. They had refused to wash. They had endured beatings and solitary confinement. They had watched as their plight was ignored. They felt pushed into a corner with no way out. In this atmosphere of desperation, an old and powerful idea resurfaced: the hunger strike. The hunger strike has a long and potent history in Irish republicanism, seen as the ultimate act of defiance, a way of turning the body itself into a battlefield. It's a weapon of last resort, a moral challenge to the state. The logic is as stark as it is powerful. You can imprison my body, you can label me a criminal, you can subject me to inhuman conditions, but you cannot make me eat. My life is the last thing I have control over, and I will sacrifice it to prove the political nature of my conviction. The decision wasn't taken lightly. The IRA leadership on the outside was hesitant, aware of the risks. But inside the H-blocks, the push came from the prisoners themselves, who felt they had nothing left to lose. The violence and political deadlock of 1979 was the final catalyst. Thatcher's hardening position meant there would be no compromise. The IRA's escalating campaign meant the government was in no mood to grant concessions. The prisoners were caught in the middle. They saw the hunger strike not as an act of suicide, but as the final, and perhaps only, way to fight back. It was a way to reclaim the narrative, to force the world to look again, and to die for the political status that Thatcher was so determined to deny them. In October 1980, 7 prisoners began the first hunger strike. It was called off after 53 days when the prisoners thought they had a deal, a belief that turned out to be tragically mistaken. When it became clear the deal wasn't what it seemed, the men felt betrayed and more resolute than ever. The stage was set for a second, more organized, and ultimately more tragic confrontation. The year of blood and bombs had set a collision course, and the final, fatal weapon was now primed. On March 1, 1981, the 5th anniversary of the day special category status was abolished. The IRA's leader in the maze, a 27-year-old man named Bobby Sands, refused his first meal. A second hunger strike had begun. This time, it would not end until 10 men were dead. The events of 1979 were the crucible in which the 1981 hunger strike was forged. The unyielding stance of Thatcher's government, cemented by Warrenpoint and Mullimore, ensured there would be no backing down. Her crime is crime policy was now an immovable object. The hunger strikers were an unstoppable force. The clash was inevitable. The 1981 hunger strike became a global media event. Suddenly, the Republican movement had something more powerful than a bomb, a martyr. While on strike, Bobby Sands was nominated to stand in a by-election for the British Parliament. In a stunning result, he won. His election completely demolished the British narrative. How could these men be common criminals with no popular support if one of them was now a member of Parliament, elected by over 30,000 people? It proved they had a significant political mandate. Sands died on May 5, 1981, after 66 days without food. His funeral was attended by over 100,000 people. 9 more prisoners would follow him to their deaths before the strike was finally called off. While the strike failed to achieve its main demand for political status at the time, its long-term consequences were profound. The immense political energy it unleashed was channeled into a new strategy. Sinn Féin, the IRA's political wing, realized the power of the ballot box. This gave rise to the famous Armalite and ballot box strategy, a dual approach of continuing the armed struggle while building a powerful electoral machine. The hunger strikes, born from the desperation and deadlock of 1979, ultimately propelled Sinn Féin into a major political force, laying the groundwork for the peace process over a decade later. 1979 didn't directly cause the hunger strikes, but it created the conditions of impossibility. It was a year that saw battle lines drawn in thick, unmoving ink. A year of violence so shocking that it made political compromise toxic. It closed every door for the men in the H-blocks, leaving them convinced that the only path left was a slow walk towards self-immolation, in the hope that the world would finally be forced to watch. How might history have been different if a path to compromise had been found in 1979? Is a struggle defined more by those who inflict violence, or by those who are willing to endure suffering? These are the questions that linger, long after the echoes of that explosive year have faded. "1979 was a year when the Troubles reached new depths of violence and international attention. It was a year of assassinations, ambushes, and hardened political resolve. The rhythm of bombings and shootings had become grimly familiar, but in August the conflict struck at the very heart of Britain and Ireland. On August 27th, the IRA assassinated Lord Louis Mountbatten, a cousin of Queen Elizabeth II, by planting a bomb on his fishing boat off the coast of County Sligo. The explosion killed Mountbatten, 2 teenage boys, and an elderly woman. The attack reverberated across the world, shocking the British establishment and demonstrating that no one was beyond the reach of violence. That same day, the IRA carried out its deadliest assault on the British Army, the Warrenpoint ambush. 2 explosions killed 18 soldiers, the highest single-day loss of life for the military during the Troubles. The precision and scale of the attack underscored the IRA's capacity to inflict devastating damage, and it hardened attitudes on all sides. These twin events marked August 1979 as one of the darkest months of the conflict. For Unionists, they were proof of Republican ruthlessness. For Republicans, they were demonstrations of strength, intended to show that the armed struggle could not be ignored. For ordinary citizens, they were reminders that the violence could strike anywhere, at any time, with devastating consequences. Politically, 1979 also brought change. In May, Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Her arrival signaled a harder line on Northern Ireland. Thatcher was determined not to yield to paramilitary violence, and her government refused to restore special category status to paramilitary prisoners. This decision set the stage for the prison protests that would escalate into hunger strikes in the years ahead. Meanwhile, in the Republic of Ireland, the Mountbatten assassination embarrassed the IRA internationally, even as it emboldened its supporters at home. Dublin condemned the violence, highlighting the strained relationship between Irish nationalism and Republican militancy. For ordinary people in Northern Ireland, 1979 was another year of fear and uncertainty. Bombings and shootings continued across towns and cities. Civilians were caught in crossfire, targeted in sectarian attacks, or traumatized by the constant presence of soldiers and checkpoints. The Warrenpoint ambush and Mountbatten's assassination dominated headlines, but the daily grind of violence, the smaller bombings, the shootings, the intimidation, continued to shape lives in ways less visible but equally devastating. By the end of 1979, nearly 120 people had been killed. Each death was a story of loss, of families shattered, of communities scarred. The statistics told one story, but the human reality told another. A society trapped in a cycle of violence, unable to escape the shadow of mistrust and division. 1979 stands as a grim reminder of how far the conflict had escalated. The assassination of Mountbatten showed that no one, not even royalty, was beyond the reach of violence. The Warrenpoint ambush demonstrated the IRA's capacity to inflict devastating losses on the British Army. The arrival of Margaret Thatcher signaled a new phase of political confrontation, one that would shape the decade to come. 1979 was not a year of compromise or reconciliation. It was a year of escalation, of symbolic attacks, of hardened positions. It was a year when the Troubles became not just a local conflict, but an international story, when the violence of Northern Ireland reverberated across the world. And yet, even in 1979, there were voices calling for peace. The memory of the Peace People movement lingered, though its momentum had faded. Community leaders continued to plead for dialogue, for an end to the killings. But their voices were drowned out by the explosions at Warrenpoint, by the blast that killed Mountbatten, by the relentless rhythm of funerals and reprisals. As the year-end fell on 1979, Northern Ireland stood at a crossroads. The violence had reached new heights, the politics had hardened, and the prisons were becoming the next battleground. The hunger strikes were on the horizon, the international spotlight was intensifying, and the conflict showed no sign of ending. This was 1979, a year of assassinations and ambushes, of political change and hardened resolve, of communities trapped in fear and families torn apart. It was a year that revealed the persistence of the Troubles, the depth of division, and the difficulty of peace. This story is part of The Troubles, 1968 to 1998, a 30-part documentary series streaming exclusively on Emerald Chronicle. Each episode focuses on a single year of the conflict, tracing the evolution of violence, politics, and community resilience across 3 decades. The series reveals how ordinary lives were shaped by extraordinary events. As this chapter closes with the devastation of 1979, the journey continues into 1980. Episode 13 explores the pivotal year when the prisons became the central battleground. We will focus on the first hunger strike, led by Republican prisoners demanding political status, the mounting tension inside the Maze prison, and the wider impact on communities outside the walls. The episode reveals how 1980 set the stage for the dramatic hunger strikes of 1981, reshaping the conflict's political and human dimensions. "1979 was a year of escalation, of tragedy, and of history written in blood. Yet as the story moves forward, the prisons will become the new front line, and the hunger strikes of 1980 will redefine the struggle. This was the Troubles in 1979, and the journey continues.